My stepmother sold my mother's wedding dress that I was saving for my wedding and bought herself a spa vacation. I didn't make a scene, but yesterday the family discovered who really owns the house they live in. I found out when I was going through the attic, looking for my old yearbooks. A box labeled winter clothes caught my eye, not because I needed sweaters in July, but because it was oddly placed behind my mom's hope chest, tucked away like a secret. I pulled it down, expecting moth-eaten scarves, but instead found empty tissue paper and a receipt. A sales receipt from Vintage Vows, a high-end consignment shop downtown. Item, 1980s handcrafted lace wedding gown with pearl beading. Sale price, $5,000. Seller, Barbara Wilson. My father's new wife. My stepmother. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just any dress. This was my mother's wedding gown, the one thing I'd explicitly asked to keep after she died 3 years ago. The one thing Barbara promised was safe, in storage. The one thing I dreamed of wearing when I married James next spring. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, holding that crisp receipt like it was both a suicide note and a murder weapon. My vision blurred, not from dust, but from tears I refused to let fall. I took 3 deep breaths, folded the receipt neatly, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I went back downstairs, smiled at Barbara, who was sprawled on our living room couch scrolling through Instagram photos of her recent spa getaway at Canyon Ranch, and asked if she wanted me to pick up anything special for dinner. She didn't even look up from her phone. Whatever you're having is fine, sweetie. Your dad's working late again. I nodded, grabbed my car keys, and walked out like nothing had happened. But inside my head, gears were turning. You see, Barbara didn't know what I did for a living. She thought I was some kind of paper pusher at a law firm. She had no idea I was a trust and estate attorney who specialized in inheritance law. And she certainly had no idea what my mother had arranged before she died, or what I'd quietly put into motion 2 years ago while everyone was distracted by Barbara's extravagant Christmas party. Sometimes the best revenge isn't losing your mind in the moment. Sometimes it's keeping your cool while you pull the rug out from under someone who never bothered to check what floor they were standing on. Updated. Wow, I can't believe how many of you are following this story already. Thank you for all the supportive comments. To those asking if I confronted Barbara right away, nope, that's not my style. Strategic patience is way more satisfying. Would you have exploded on the spot or played the long game like me? Here's the backstory. Mom died from ovarian cancer when I was 22. Dad, a chronic avoider who'd rather amputate his feelings than process them, met Barbara at a grief support group he attended exactly twice. She was there because her cat died. Yes, you read that right. Her cat. 6 months later, they were married at the courthouse while I was away at law school. I found out via text message, "Hey honey, Barbara and I tied the knot today. She's moving in tomorrow. Hope that's cool." Cool wasn't exactly the word I'd use. I was buried in finals and knee-deep in student loans, trying to finish my last year of law school while grieving the mother who'd pushed me to go in the first place. Mom was brilliant that way. She'd been a paralegal at a small firm, always encouraging me to aim higher than she had. "Get the degree I never could," she'd say. "Then you'll never be at anyone's mercy." When I graduated, she was already sick, but she made it to the ceremony in a wheelchair, beaming with pride. After she died, coming home felt like walking into a museum where all the exhibits had been rearranged. Dad was working longer hours, avoiding the empty house. I was drowning in new job stress and grief. Then suddenly, Barbara with her chunky turquoise jewelry and her healing crystals. Barbara, who referred to my mother as your father's first wife, like she was a practice round. Barbara, who started redecorating before the moving truck was fully unloaded, replacing family photos with her terrible abstract paintings. "Your mother would want us to move forward," she'd say, while literally moving Mom's antique reading chair to the garage. I bit my tongue so often I'm surprised it didn't fall off. The dress situation started when I got engaged last year. James proposed at the botanical garden where Mom used to take me for picnics. When I called to tell Dad, Barbara answered his phone. "That's nice, hun," she said, sounding distracted. "We're at Pottery Barn. I'll tell your father." 2 days later, I drove home to show them the ring and casually mentioned I wanted to wear Mom's dress. "Oh, that old thing," Barbara waved dismissively. "It's somewhere in storage. Very 80s, very dated. But if you want it, I'm sure we can dig it out eventually." I should have gone looking for it that day. Instead, I trusted her when she said it was safe. Big mistake. What Barbara didn't know, what no one knew except my mother's ancient lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, was that Mom had set up a rather creative estate plan before she died. The family house, the one Dad and Barbara were living in, wasn't actually left to Dad the way everyone assumed. Mom put it in a trust with very specific conditions. Dad could live there, but ownership would transfer to me on my 25th birthday, which had quietly passed 3 months ago. Mr. Goldstein had called me into his office, handed me the paperwork, and explained that I was now technically my father and stepmother's landlord. "Your mother was a smart woman," he said, adjusting his thick glasses. "She knew your father well enough to know he'd remarry quickly. She wanted to make sure you weren't overlooked. I hadn't done anything with this information. I figured it was just Mom being overprotective from beyond the grave. Dad and Barbara weren't perfect, but they weren't terrible enough to evict. I filed the paperwork away and went on with my life, until that receipt for Mom's dress. The dress she wore when she married Dad, handmade by my grandmother, who was a seamstress for a local theater. The dress with tiny pearls sewn into the lace, some of which came from my great-grandmother's broken necklace. The dress that was supposed to connect 4 generations of women at my wedding, sold for a spa vacation. That changed everything. I left the house that day and drove straight to a Starbucks where I could think. The barista called out, "Skinny vanilla latte for, Nat something?" But I barely heard her. I was too busy making plans, calculating timelines, weighing options. By the time I returned home with Chinese takeout, acting completely normal, I knew exactly what I was going to do. First, I called James and filled him in. He was furious on my behalf, but impressed by my restraint. "Most people would have burned the house down," he said. "Literally." "That wouldn't be very strategic," I replied, "especially since it's technically my house now." Next, I called Mr. Goldstein and explained what had happened. He made that disappointed clicking sound with his tongue. "Your mother worried something like this might happen," he said. "That's why she was so specific about the trust terms. Do you want me to prepare the paperwork?" I did. All of it. For the next 3 days, I acted completely normal. I went to work, came home, made small talk with Barbara about her spa treatments. The hot stone massage was life-changing. You should try it sometime. And nodded sympathetically when she complained about the gardener charging too much for, basically just mowing a lawn. I listened to Dad's excuses about working late, knowing he was avoiding the empty space Mom had left and that Barbara had filled with her yoga mats and essential oil diffusers, all while the documents were being prepared, notarized, and filed with the county. On Wednesday, I took a personal day from work. I knew Barbara had lunch plans with her sister at that overpriced salad place where they charged $6 extra for avocado. Dad was at work as usual. The house was empty when the courier arrived with the manila envelope containing everything I needed. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Mom used to help me with math homework, and carefully arranged the papers in order. The trust documents showing I owned the house, the formal notice of changes to the living arrangement, the new lease agreement with updated terms, and finally, a detailed invoice for the wedding dress, valued by a professional appraiser at $8,250. The dress itself, plus emotional damages and appreciation value. I made 3 copies of everything. One set I placed in the center of the table. Another I slid under Dad's paperweight in his home office. The third I left on Barbara's tacky mirrored vanity, right next to her new jade face roller from Canyon Ranch. Then I drove to my apartment and waited for my phone to explode. It took 3 hours. I was halfway through a Game of Thrones rerun when Dad called. His voice sounded like he'd aged 10 years in an afternoon. "Natalie," he said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke, Dad," I said calmly. "It's inheritance law. Mom left the house to me, not to you. I've been the owner since my birthday in April. I just didn't say anything because I didn't see a need to change our arrangement. Until now," he said quietly. I could hear the realization in his voice. Until Barbara sold Mom's wedding dress for a spa weekend. The dress I specifically asked to keep. The dress I was planning to wear at my wedding. The silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, processing. "I didn't know," he finally said, "about the dress. Natalie, I swear, I had no idea." Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part wondered how many other things he'd chosen not to notice while Barbara systematically erased Mom from our home. "Well, now you know," I said. "About the dress and the house. The papers explain everything. There's a new lease agreement that you and Barbara need to sign if you want to continue living there." "You're charging us rent?" He sounded shocked. "We're your family." "Family doesn't sell priceless heirlooms behind each other's backs," I replied. "The rent is fair market value for the neighborhood. You can afford it on your salary. And there's an invoice for the dress." He started to say something else, but I heard a commotion in the background. Barbara's voice shrill and panicked. "She can't do this. It's our house. I've spent thousands redecorating." Dad's voice became muffled as he covered the phone, trying to calm her down. When he came back on the line, he sounded resigned. "We need to talk about this in person." "I'm free tomorrow after work," I said. 5:30. I'll bring dinner." I hung up and let out the breath I'd been holding. James texted to check on me. "How did it go?" Phase 1 complete, I replied. Operation Wedding Dress is officially underway. The next day was surprisingly calm. I kept expecting frantic calls or angry texts, but my phone remained quiet. Either they were in shock or they were plotting. Either way, I was ready. I left work at 5, picked up Italian food from that little place near the courthouse, and drove to what was now officially my house. Barbara's car wasn't in the driveway. Interesting. Dad met me at the door looking haggard, like he hadn't slept. We sat at the kitchen table with containers of pasta between us like a carb buffer zone. Barbara's staying at her sister's, he said after an awkward silence. She's upset. I twirled fettuccine around my fork. Is she upset about selling my mother's wedding dress without permission, or upset about facing consequences for it? Dad winced. She said she thought it was just taking up space in storage, that no one had mentioned it in years. I mentioned it literally the day I got engaged, I pointed out. And I asked about it 3 more times since then. She told me it was safe. He stared at his untouched food. I didn't know, Natalie, I really didn't. That's the problem, Dad. There's a lot you don't know because you choose not to look. You didn't know about the dress. You didn't know about the house. You didn't know Barbara's been slowly getting rid of Mom's things one by one. His head snapped. What? I sighed. Mom's books? Gone to Goodwill last year. Her record collection? Sold at a yard sale while you were on that fishing trip? Her gardening tools? Tossed out because they were rusty and outdated. I tried telling you, but you always changed the subject. His face crumpled, and for the first time since Mom died, I saw real grief in his eyes. Not the performative kind he'd displayed at the funeral, but the raw, ugly truth of loss. I screwed up, he whispered. Yeah, I agreed. You did. We sat in silence for a minute. Finally, he pulled the lease agreement toward him. So what happens now? Now you make a choice, I said, keeping my voice even. You and Barbara can sign the new lease agreement, pay fair market rent, and reimburse me for the dress. Or you can move out and I'll sell the house. He looked around the kitchen, Mom's kitchen, with the yellow walls she'd painted herself, and nodded slowly. And if we sign? Then there are new house rules. I handed him a separate document I'd prepared. No selling or removing anything else that belonged to Mom without my express written permission. No more pretending she never existed. And I get unrestricted access to the attic and basement to inventory what's left of her things. Dad scanned the paper, his shoulders slumping further with each line. Natalie, I'm sorry. For all of it. For not protecting your mom's memory better. For letting Barbara... He trailed off. Steamroll over everything? I suggested. He nodded, looking ashamed. I'm not doing this to punish you, Dad, I said, softening slightly. I'm doing it because someone needs to stand up for Mom. She can't defend herself anymore. What about the wedding? He asked. Without your mom's dress? I'll find something else, I said, the sadness finally catching in my throat. It won't be the same, but nothing ever is. Dad signed the lease agreement then and there. He also wrote me a personal check for the full amount of the dress invoice, $8,250, without a single argument about the price. I'll deal with Barbara, he said. This is on us, not you. I nodded, gathering the signed papers. As I stood to leave, he tentatively reached for my hand. Your mother would be proud of you, he said, for standing up for yourself, for becoming such a good lawyer. She'd be disappointed it was necessary, I replied, but I squeezed his hand anyway. The aftermath was both simpler and more complicated than I expected. Barbara moved back in after a week of dramatic exile at her sister's. She signed the lease without looking me in the eye and has been coldly civil ever since. Dad's been making clumsy attempts to reconnect, inviting me to Sunday dinners, and sending random texts with old photos he's dug up of Mom. I used the dress money to start a small nonprofit providing legal advice to children dealing with inheritance issues after parents remarry. We're small, but growing. Our tagline, protecting your past, securing your future. James and I are still getting married in the spring. I found a different dress, not as meaningful, but beautiful in its own way. And Mom will still be with me, not in lace and pearls, but in the strength she taught me. In the home she protected for me. In the way I refused to let anyone make me disappear. Updated, your messages keep flooding in. Thank you. I've gotten so many questions about what Barbara said when she found out. She actually tried to argue the dress was technically hers since Dad had given her all Mom's things. He hadn't. When that failed, she cried about feeling attacked and unwelcome. Classic Darvo. Has anyone else dealt with a step-parent who rewrites reality? As for what happened next? Barbara's attitude underwent a dramatic shift after the house revelation. She came back from her sister's with her suitcases and a noticeably different approach. The woman who once left her smoothie blender for me to clean started washing dishes immediately after using them. The endless commentary about my sensible but boring career choice vanished overnight. She even started referring to my mother by her actual name, Catherine, instead of your dad's first wife. But the fakeness was almost worse than the hostility. Every time I visited, she'd hover awkwardly, calling me sweetie and honey with this strange smile that never reached her eyes. She'd bring up Mom in artificial ways. Catherine would have loved this weather, or I'm using Catherine's recipe for potato salad, as if reading from a script titled, How to Appease Your Stepdaughter Who Owns Your House. Dad, meanwhile, was doing genuine soul-searching. He started therapy, actual professional therapy, not the one-and-done grief group where he'd met Barbara. He found Mom's old journals in the basement and spent evenings reading them, sometimes calling me to share memories I'd forgotten. He asked about my wedding plans and offered to help in ways that mattered, not just financially, but emotionally. The house dynamic had fundamentally changed. My surprise inheritance gave me a voice that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Barbara couldn't sell or discard Mom's things anymore, and Dad couldn't pretend not to notice. The power imbalance that had silenced me for 3 years had finally shifted. James found the whole situation darkly satisfying. It's like a reality show where the twist is revealed in episode 3, he said one night over takeout in my apartment. Entitled Stepmother discovers she's actually the tenant, not the owner. I never wanted to be a landlord, I admitted, especially not to my own father. But you're a damn good one, James pointed out. You didn't kick them out. You didn't jack up the rent to something ridiculous. You just established boundaries that should have existed all along. He was right. The rent I was charging was actually below market value for our neighborhood. The rules I'd established were reasonable. No more unauthorized selling of family heirlooms. No more pretending my mother never existed. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being fair. The following weekend, I went to the house with empty plastic bins to finally sort through Mom's remaining things in the attic. I'd been putting it off, dreading both the emotional toll and potential conflict with Barbara. But when I arrived, I found Dad had already brought everything down and organized it in the guest room, Mom's old office before Barbara converted it to a meditation space. I thought this might be easier, he said, gesturing to the neatly labeled boxes. There's more than I realized. He'd rescued items I thought were long gone. Mom's collection of vintage brooches, her handwritten recipe cards, the clay bowl I made her in 3rd grade that she used for keys and loose change. They weren't valuable in any conventional sense, but they were priceless to me. Barbara appeared in the doorway, hovering uncertainly. I found this in the back of the linen closet, she said, holding out a small velvet pouch. I think it might have been your mother's. Inside was Mom's favorite necklace, a simple silver pendant with a moonstone that Dad had given her on their 10th anniversary. I'd asked about it repeatedly after she died, and Barbara had always claimed ignorance. Thank you, I said stiffly, taking the pouch. She nodded, then hesitated. Natalie, I know you probably don't want to hear this from me, but I'm sorry about the dress, about a lot of things. I studied her face, searching for the insincerity I'd come to expect. But all I saw was uncomfortable regret, not profound remorse, but at least acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It wasn't enough to erase the past 3 years, but it was something. Thank you for the apology, I said formally. I appreciate you returning the necklace. She nodded again and retreated, leaving me alone with Dad and the physical remnants of Mom's life. She's trying, Dad said quietly. Because she has to, I pointed out. Not because she wants to. Maybe, he conceded. But sometimes doing the right thing, even for the wrong reasons, can lead to change. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't argue. Instead, I focused on the unexpected gift of rediscovering pieces of Mom I thought were gone forever. Each item I packed away was a tiny connection preserved, not just for me, but for my future children who would never meet their grandmother except through these tangible links to her life. That evening, as I was leaving with my car full of plastic bins, Dad walked me out to the driveway. Your mother was always better at seeing the big picture than I was, he said, leaning against my car door. That's why she set up that trust for you. She knew I'd make mistakes. Mom wasn't perfect either, Dad, I said, surprising myself with the admission. But she would have fought for me. That's the difference. He nodded, eyes glistening. I'm trying to fight for you now. I know it's late, but I'm trying. I hugged him briefly before getting into my car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rear view mirror and saw him still standing in the driveway, looking smaller and older than I remembered. The truth is, there's no perfect resolution to this kind of family fracture. Barbara still lives in my house, sleeping in what was once my parents' bedroom. Dad still chooses the path of least resistance more often than not. And I'm still navigating the complicated reality of being both daughter and landlord, grieving, a mother whose absence created the vacuum that Barbara stepped into. But something fundamental has changed. For the first time since Mom died, I feel like I have a say in preserving her memory. The powerlessness that defined those first years after her death has been replaced by something stronger. Not just legal authority over a house, but the confidence to enforce boundaries without guilt. James and I are moving forward with our wedding plans. We found a venue, a botanical garden with a greenhouse full of the orchids Mom used to grow. My dress isn't hers, but I'm wearing her moonstone necklace and carrying a bouquet with the same flowers she had at her wedding. Small connections that Barbara can't sell or discard. I still wish I had Mom's dress. The loss of it aches in unexpected moments. When I'm shopping for accessories, when relatives ask about wedding traditions, when I see mothers and daughters at bridal boutiques. But I've come to realize that the dress was just fabric and thread, precious because of what it represented, but not the only way to honor Mom's memory. What matters more is the lesson she taught me through both her life and her careful estate. Planning, protect what's yours, stand your ground, and never let anyone make you feel small in spaces you've earned the right to occupy. Sometimes the most important inheritance isn't what gets left behind, but what gets passed down. Strength, disguised as legal documents, wisdom hidden in trust terms, and the quiet power of knowing exactly when to show your cards. Updated. This will probably be my last update since the wedding is next month, and things have settled into a new normal. For those asking if I'm still charging my dad rent, yes. But it goes into a separate account that will eventually become a down payment for our future home. Barbara still walks on eggshells around me, but Dad is slowly becoming the father I needed all along. Have you ever found that sometimes it takes an earthquake to finally rebuild on stronger foundations?